Reed Calloway had carried a rifle into that barn every night for 3 nights straight. Something had been taking his eggs. He figured a fox, maybe a coyote grown bold from the drought. He pushed the henhouse door open with his boot and held the lantern high and moved the light slow across the hay. He found the thief. She was 4 years old. Maybe. Sitting in the corner with her knees pulled to her chest, a cracked egg in both hands, yolk running down her wrists, looking up at him with eyes so hollow it stopped his breath entirely. He had never lowered his rifle so fast in his life. If this story moves something in you, subscribe to this channel and follow every part all the way to the end. Drop the name of your city in the comments. I want to see how far this little girl's story travels. The summer of 1879 came down on Harlan County, Texas, the way punishment comes without warning, without apology, and without any particular interest in whether you deserved it. The grass had gone to straw by the middle of June. The creek that cut along the western edge of Reed Calloway's land had dropped so low a man could step across it without wetting the sole of his boot, and the cattle moved slow and stupid in the heat the way animals do when they have given up on things getting better and decided just to survive the day. Reed Calloway was 42 years old and had the look of a man who had made peace with hard things by refusing to look at them directly. He worked his 300 acres alone, had worked them alone for 3 years, since Eleanor had gone in the winter of 1876, the fever taking her in 11 days. There had been no children. That was its own kind of grief. One that sat differently than the loss of a person, quieter and harder to name the absence of something that had never been, rather than the absence of something that had. He did not talk about Eleanor. He did not talk about much. He rose before light, and he worked until his hands were too tired to hold anything, and then he went inside and ate whatever was simplest, and slept without ceremony, and started again. He had 40 hens. They were productive animals, steady and reliable in a way he respected, and the eggs they gave him were both food and small income traded at the dry goods store in Cutter's Mill for what he could not grow or make himself. 3 mornings in a row he had found the henhouse light when he checked it at dawn. Not cleaned out, just short. 4 eggs the first morning, 3 the second, 5 the third. Enough to matter. Enough to tell him it was something deliberate, something that came back. He'd set the lantern on the post outside the henhouse on the 4th night and waited inside in the dark, standing with his back to the wall and the Winchester low, not raised, just in hand. He was not going to shoot a fox. He just wanted to see what he was dealing with. He heard it at 2:30. A sound that was wrong from the start, not the scratch and scrabble of an animal, but something softer, slower, more careful. The creak of the door pulling back an inch, then another, then a pause. Then the door swung wide enough for something small to come through. Reed reached outside the henhouse door and picked up the lantern and turned the flame up and came back through the door and held the light into the corner. She was sitting in the hay with a cracked egg in both hands. The yolk had run down her wrists and dried there. She was wearing a flour sack that someone had cut holes in for her arms and head. No shoes. Her feet were bare and dirty, and the soles were hard the way the soles of feet get when they have been bare on summer ground for a long time. Her hair was dark and tangled, and there was hay in it, which told him she had been sleeping in here, not just coming for the eggs. Her face was thin. Not the thin of a child who ran and played in summer heat, but the thin of a child who had not eaten enough for longer than a few days. She was 4 years old, maybe 4, small enough that the cracked egg she was holding was large in her hands. She looked up at him, and she did not scream. She did not run. She pulled the egg tighter against her chest, the way a drowning person pulls the only floating thing. Reed lowered the Winchester. He did it without thinking about it. There was no thinking to do. He crouched down in the hay and set the lantern on the ground between them and looked at her. She looked back at him. Her eyes were dark brown and enormous in her thin face, and they had a quality he could not name immediately, and then could. They were watchful, the way the eyes of something wild are watchful. Not frightened exactly. Alert. The eyes of something that had learned a long time ago that people moved fast and without warning, and that the only thing to do about that was to see them coming before they arrived. "Hey," Reed said. His voice came out low. He hadn't meant to make it low, it just came that way. "Hey, now, I ain't gonna hurt you." She said nothing. "That's my egg you got there," he said. She looked at the egg. Then she looked at him. Then she looked at the egg again. "You hungry?" She pressed her lips together. She looked at the hay. "That's all right." He sat back on his heels. He thought about what to do and came up with the only thing that seemed to make any sense. "I got more eggs inside. Cooked ones. You want to come inside with me and eat something cooked?" She didn't move. "I ain't gonna take you anywhere you don't want to go." He set the Winchester flat on the ground and slid it away from himself, and she watched it go and then looked back at him. "I just want to know you're all right, and I want you to eat something that ain't raw." A long silence. The hens moved and settled around them. One of them walked past the little girl's leg, and the girl looked down at it. And something happened in her face for just a moment. Something young and ordinary, and then it was gone. "Chicken," she said. Reed looked at her. "That's right," he said. "That's a chicken." She looked at the hen. Then she looked at him. "She don't mind me." "Doesn't look like it," he said. Another silence. Then the girl looked at the egg in her hands. Then she looked at him one more time with those watchful dark eyes, and she did the thing he had not expected. She held the egg out toward him. He stared at it. "Go on," she said. Her voice was so small it was barely sound. "You can have it back." Something moved in Reed Calloway's chest that had not moved in a long time. He cleared his throat. "You keep it," he said. "But come inside with me and I'll cook you a proper one. Deal." She held the egg in both hands and thought about this with the gravity of a child who had been required to make decisions that were too large for her age. Then she said, "Okay." She stood up. She was not much taller standing than she had been sitting. She looked up at him when he rose to his full height and her chin came back, but she did not step away. She just recalculated the size of him and held her ground. Reed picked up the lantern. He walked to the henhouse door. He looked back at her. She was following him. 3 steps behind, holding the cracked egg in both hands. He went to the house, and she followed him across the yard and up the step and through the back door, without being told twice, which told him she was not afraid of the house itself, only of what might be inside it. He hung the lantern. He went to the stove. He put wood in and got a flame going and put the cast iron pan on and cracked 4 eggs into it. Not 2, 4, and fried them in the fat that was sitting in the pan from yesterday's supper, and put them on a plate with a piece of bread that was 2 days old, but still good, and set it on the table. She was standing into the middle of the kitchen with the cracked egg still in her hands watching him. "Sit down," he said, pulling out the chair. "Right there." She looked at the chair. Then she climbed up into it the way small children climb into chairs, the whole body effort of it, the way it takes both arms and a certain amount of determination. She set the cracked egg on the table in front of her, very carefully exactly parallel with the edge of the table, and then she looked at the plate of eggs and bread, and she went completely still. Reed put a fork beside the plate. She picked it up and looked at it and set it down and ate with her hands. He did not say anything about that. He poured water from the pitcher into a cup and set it beside her and went to the other side of the kitchen and leaned against the wall with his arms folded and watched her eat. She ate the way he had never seen a child eat. Not fast, the way hungry children grab at food. Steady, deliberate, like someone who had learned to eat with complete focus because food was not guaranteed, and wasting the experience of it was something she could not afford. She ate every egg. She ate the bread. She drank the water in 3 long swallows. Then she put both hands flat on the table and looked at him and said, "Thank you." 2 words, perfectly clear. The manners of a child who had been taught by someone who meant it. Reed pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. He folded his hands on the table. He looked at her. She looked back. "What's your name?" he said. A
This
pause.
story was posted on the
Annie.
channel The Rusty Saddle.
Annie what?
Please do not repost it in any
She thought
form.
about this. Just Annie. He nodded slowly. All right, Annie. My name's Reed. Reed Calloway. This is my ranch. He paused. How long you been sleeping in my barn? She looked at the table. She put one finger on the cracked egg and moved it a half-inch. Since the rain, she said. He thought back. The rain had been 6 days ago. A short, hard rain that had come out of nowhere and left by morning. 6 days. You been eating eggs for 6 days? Mostly. Mostly, what else? She thought about it. Berries. But they ran out. Annie. He kept his voice even. Where are you from? She looked at her hands. Ain't gonna send you anywhere tonight, he said. I just need to know. Town? She said finally. Which town? Cutter's Mill. She said it flat. No particular feeling attached to it, the way you say the name of a place that is only a fact to you, not a home. Cutter's Mill was 4 miles north. He knew it. Dry goods store, a saloon, a blacksmith, a livery, and enough dust and hard luck to make a man grateful he lived 4 miles out. You walked 4 miles? She nodded. Alone. Mm-hmm. He studied her. The flour sack dress. The bare feet with their hardened soles. The way she'd arranged that cracked egg on the table like it was something precious. Annie, where's your mama? The question landed, and she did not answer it right away. She put her finger on the cracked egg again. She moved it a 1/4 inch back. Then she said very quietly, without looking up, Gone. Reed was still. When? After the cold. The cold. The cold had been February. 5 months ago. And your daddy? Don't got one. She said it without drama. As simple as any other fact about the weather or the season. Who were you living with after your mama went? She looked up at him then. Full on. Those dark, watchful eyes, and something in them that he had to work to hold without looking away because of what it held. Not grief. Something past grief. The flatness of a child who has put grief somewhere internal and locked the door on it because grief was a resource she could not afford to spend. Mr. Hicks, she said. He's got the boarding house. Reed knew the boarding house in Cutter's Mill. He knew Gerald Hicks the way you know a man you have bought a drink for twice without ever choosing to and have no particular opinion of either way. A big man, soft around the middle, with a loud laugh and small eyes. He ran the boarding house and took a percentage of the card games that ran in the back room on Fridays. Mr. Hicks know you left. Annie looked at the cracked egg. Yes, sir. He didn't come after you. A silence. He was glad, she said. 2 words. Said the same way she said everything. Flat and without decoration, the way you say things, when you have decided that the truth doesn't hurt less for being softened, so you might as well say it straight. Reed Calloway sat across the kitchen table from a 4-year-old girl who had walked 4 miles alone, who had lived on raw eggs and dried up berries for 6 days, whose mother had died in February, whose father had never existed on paper, and who had just told him in the calmest voice he had ever heard on a child that the man she'd been left with had been glad to lose her. He breathed out through his nose. He kept his hands flat on the table because he needed something to press against. He hurt you. Reed asked it quiet and straight. No circling. Annie considered this with the honest specificity of a child who did not yet know how to soften things for the comfort of adults. Not like hitting, she said. He just didn't. She paused, looking for the word. He just didn't see me. Like I wasn't there. Like I was the same as the chair. She looked at the chair she was sitting in. The chair don't need to eat, she said. He forgot about the chair a lot. Reed looked at her. This 4-year-old girl describing neglect with a metaphor she had arrived at herself, comparing herself to furniture, saying it without self-pity, because she did not yet know that what had happened to her warranted self-pity, because she had nothing to compare it to. This was simply the shape of how things had been. Well, Reed said carefully, chairs don't eat and you do. You want more eggs? She looked at the empty plate. Then she looked at him. Is that all right? I got 40 hens, he said. I think we can spare a few more. He got up and cooked 4 more eggs and put them in front of her, and she ate them with the same focused, deliberate attention as before. And when she was done, she put both hands in her lap and sat up straight and looked at him. What's going to happen now? She said. He had been asking himself the same thing since he'd found her in the henhouse. He was a 42-year-old man who lived alone on a 300-acre ranch with 40 hens and 3 horses and a house that had been quiet for 3 years. He was not equipped for this. He did not know the first thing about children, specifically about children who were 4 years old and had been made to feel like furniture by a man who should have been protecting them. What he knew was that it was 2:30 in the morning and she had eaten 3 days' worth of food in 20 minutes, and her feet were bare, and she was 4 years old, and she needed to sleep in an actual bed. Tonight, he said, you're going to sleep in the spare room. There's a bed and a blanket, and it ain't hay. He watched her face. Tomorrow we figure out the rest. You ain't sending me back to Mr. Hicks. He looked at her steadily. Not tonight. Not tonight or not ever. He held her gaze. She was 4 years old, and she was asking the question with the precision of a lawyer, which told him she had been promised things before that turned out to only be true for a short time, and she had learned to specify. Not ever, he said. And then he was quiet, because he had not planned to say that, and he did not entirely know yet how he intended to make it true, but he had said it, and it was out in the room now, and he was not a man who took words back. She looked at him for a long moment, the watchful dark eyes running some kind of internal accounting he could not follow. Measuring him, measuring the room, measuring the probability of the word ever meaning what it sounded like. Then she reached across the table and picked up the cracked egg she had carried in from the henhouse and held it in both hands and looked at it. I was gonna put it back, she said. After I ate the inside. I was gonna set the shell back so it looked right. Reed looked at the cracked shell in her small hands. Why, so you wouldn't know it was me. She looked up at him. I didn't want you to be mad. He thought about that. About a 4-year-old girl carefully reconstructing an empty eggshell in the dark of a henhouse so no one would know she'd been hungry. Not because she was deceptive, because she had learned that her hunger was an inconvenience to other people, and that the most efficient thing she could do was hide it. Annie, he said. She looked at him. You don't have to hide being hungry in this house. She held the cracked egg. She looked at it. She looked at him. And something moved through her face very fast, something that came and went before he could fully see what it was, but that left something different behind, something slightly less locked than it had been. Okay, she said. He showed her the spare room. It had been Eleanor's sewing room, once small and plain, with a narrow bed along the wall, and a quilt that had been Eleanor's mother's faded blue with white stitching. He had not been in the room in a year, maybe more. It was clean. That was all he could say for it. Annie stood in the doorway and looked at the bed. She was holding the cracked eggshell in both hands still. She looked at the quilt and at the pillow. She looked at the floor and at the window. It's yours, Reed said. Long as you need it. She walked in. She climbed up onto the bed with the same whole-body effort as the chair. She sat in the middle of it and looked at him from there. You gonna lock the door? She said. He stopped. No, he said. Why would I lock the door? She thought about this. Mr. Hicks locked my door, she said. At night, so I wouldn't come out and eat. Reed put one hand flat on the doorframe. He kept his face still. He had learned in 42 years that there were things a man needed to be still about until he had a moment to deal with them privately. This was one of those things. The door stays open, he said. And there's nothing in this house you can't eat. You get hungry in the night, you go to the kitchen and eat something. She looked at him. Promise? Promise, he said. She lay down. She still had the cracked eggshell in her
This
hand.
story was posted on the
She set
channel
it on
The
the pillow
Rusty
beside
Saddle.
her,
Please
with the
do not
same careful,
repost it in
deliberate
any
precision
form.
as she'd set it on the table parallel to the edge of the pillow, exactly so. Reed looked at this 4-year-old girl who had carried a broken eggshell across a dark yard and into a stranger's house and set it beside her pillow the way another child might set a doll or a stuffed bear. It was the only thing she had brought with her. The only thing that was hers. He pulled the quilt up over her without being asked. She looked up at him from under it with those dark, watchful eyes, and she said, "You're big." "I know it," he said. "Are you mean?" He held her gaze. "No," he said. "I ain't mean." She looked at him for one more long moment, measuring, calculating, running the accounting that had kept her alive for 6 days on berries and raw eggs. Then she pulled the quilt up to her chin and turned her face toward the window and closed her eyes. Reed stood in the doorway. He stood there until her breathing went long and even, and the cracked eggshell caught the moonlight on the pillow beside her small dark head. Then he went back to the kitchen and sat down at the table alone in the lamplight, and he thought about Gerald Hicks in Cutter's Mill, who had locked a 4-year-old girl's door at night so she would not come out and eat. He thought about the word glad. He thought about tomorrow and about what he was going to do about it, and about what he had just promised in a quiet room to a child who had been promised things before that did not hold. He was going to make this one hold. He did not yet know exactly how. But he put his hands flat on the table, and he breathed, and he thought, and by the time the lamp burned low, he had the beginning of a shape in his mind. Not a plan. Not yet. Just a direction. He turned the lamp down. Okay. He went to his room. He did not sleep for a long time, but when he did, it was the first sleep in 3 years that felt like it was for something. Reed was up at 4:30, which was his habit, and he had the stove going and coffee on before he remembered that there was someone else in the house. The remembering hit him mid-reach for his single cup, and he stood with his hand on the shelf for a moment, and then took down 2 cups and set them both on the table, which felt like the strangest and most significant thing he had done in 3 years. She was up before the coffee finished. He heard the small feet on the floorboards, before he saw her the careful shuffle of someone moving through an unfamiliar space in the dark, feeling the edges of things. She appeared in the kitchen doorway with the cracked eggshell in her hand, and her hair wilder than it had been the night before, and her eyes still carrying the particular fog of a child who has slept deeply for the first time in a long while. She looked at him. She looked at the stove. She looked at the 2 cups on the table. "Morning," Reed said. "Morning," she said. She came to the table and climbed into the same chair as the night before, and set the eggshell in front of her in the same spot parallel to the edge, exactly so. He put coffee in the smaller cup with a great deal of water added and pushed it toward her, and she wrapped both hands around it and looked at him over the rim and said, "You were already up." "Always am." "Me too," she said. "Mr. Hicks didn't like it when I was up before him. Said I made noise." She drank the coffee. "I don't make noise." "I noticed that," Reed said. He cooked eggs, and she ate them, and the sun came up through the kitchen window, and she watched it come, turning her face toward it, the way flowers do the same slow, deliberate turning. He watched her do it and said nothing. After breakfast, she followed him outside. She did not ask if she could. She simply came. She was 3 steps behind him, the way she'd been the night before, not close enough to be presuming, not far enough to be separate, the careful distance of a child who has learned to make herself available without making herself a burden. He stopped at the fence post he'd been meaning to fix for a week and looked back at her. She was standing in the yard with the morning sun on her face and the eggshell still in her hand. "You gonna carry that all day?" he said. She looked at the eggshell. "Maybe," she said. He let it go. He worked on the fence post, and she watched him with the focused attention she gave everything, head slightly tilted, taking it in. After a while she said, "What's it for? Keeps the cattle in." "Why do they need to stay in?" "Because out there's not mine," he said. and I can't look after them out there. She thought about this with the gravity she applied to most things. Like a house, she said. He looked at her. Like a house, he agreed. They worked, he worked, and she watched until mid-morning, and then he straightened and looked north toward Cutter's Mill and made the decision he had been making and unmaking since 4:30. I need to ride into town, he said. She went very still, not the still of calm, the still of something that has heard a sound it recognizes. You're taking me back, she said. No. He said it flat and immediate. I told you not ever, I meant it. She looked at him. Then why? Because I need to know what I'm dealing with. He crouched down to her level. She had the eggshell pressed against her chest, now both hands around it. Annie. Gerald Hicks. He file any papers when your mama died, any legal papers saying he was your guardian. She thought about it. I don't know what papers mean. Did anyone come to the house after your mama died? Someone official, someone with a badge or a book. She shook her head. Just Mr. Hicks. He came and he said I was coming with him, and I went. Reed stood up. Okay, he said. I'm going to ride in and talk to Sheriff Danner. You're going to stay here. Her face changed, just slightly, just enough. I'll be back before noon, he said. There's bread on the shelf and eggs in the hen house. You can have whatever you want. You promise you're coming back, she said. I promise. Before noon. Before noon. She looked at him for a long, steady moment. Then she looked at the fence post he'd been fixing. Can I hand you things? She said. When you get back. Can I hand you the pieces? He looked at her. Yeah, he said. You can hand me the pieces. She nodded once. She went and sat on the step and put the eggshell in her lap and folded her hands around it and waited with the patience of a child who had spent a great deal of her short life waiting for things she wasn't sure would come. Reed saddled his horse and rode north. Sheriff Tom Danner was a lean-weathered man of 55 who had been running Cutter's Mill and the surrounding county for 12 years and had developed across those 12 years a particular economy of expression, saying in one sentence what other men took 5 for, and saying nothing at all when nothing useful could be said. He listened to Reed from behind his desk, with his hands folded and his face giving nothing away. And when Reed finished, Danner was quiet for a moment. Gerald Hicks, Danner said. Yes. And the child's been gone 6 days. 6 days sleeping in my hen house. He hasn't come looking. Danner's jaw moved. He picked up his pen and set it down. He hasn't come to me, he said. That's what I can tell you. No report filed on a missing child. He looked at Reed. Which tells you something. Tells me plenty, Reed said. What I need to know is the legal standing. The mother died in February. No father on record. Hicks took her in. Did he file anything? Any formal guardianship with the county? Danner turned in his chair and went through the filing cabinet behind him with the practiced ease of a man who knew where everything was. He pulled a folder and went through it and pulled another. He went through that one twice. Then he put them both back and turned around. Nothing, he said. No guardianship petition. No filing of any kind. Far as this county's records are concerned, that child has no legal guardian at all. Reed absorbed this, which means Hicks has no legal claim. Which means Hicks has no legal claim, Danner agreed. Which also means nobody does. He looked at Reed across the desk. Including you. I know it. You're telling me you want to change that. I'm telling you I want to know how. Danner picked up the pen this time and actually used it writing something on the paper in front of him. Judge Aldrich comes through on the first Thursday of the month, he said. That's 8 days. You file a petition for guardianship, Aldrich will hear it. He looked up. Hicks can contest it. He said he was glad she was gone, Reed said. His word. His word to you isn't worth much in a courtroom. Danner set the pen down. Reed, I'm going to ask you something direct and I need a direct answer. Go ahead. You're a 42-year-old man living alone. You found a 4-year-old girl in your barn
This
6
story was
days after
posted
she
on the
went
channel
missing,
The
and
Rusty
nobody
Saddle.
came looking.
Please do not
And now
repost it
you
in
want
any
to file
form.
for guardianship. He looked at him steadily. I've known you 11 years, and I don't think you're anything but what you appear to be. But this county's going to ask questions. People are going to talk. Let them talk, Reed said. I've been giving them nothing to say for 3 years. They need the entertainment. Something shifted in Danner's face. Not quite a smile, the suggestion of one. You got anyone who'll stand up for you, character witnesses? Reed thought about it. I got 11 years of neighbors, he said. I pay my debts. I keep my fences. I've never given anyone cause to doubt my name. That's a start, Danner said. He wrote something else. There's something else you should know. Hicks is going to find out you've got her. This is a 4-mile county Reed. It talks. He looked up. When he does, he may come to you. Not because he wants the girl, but because he's going to want to control how this looks. Reed looked at him. He locks a 4-year-old in her room at night so she won't eat, he said. He said it quiet and without heat, the way he said things he needed Danner to hear completely. He is not going to come to my property and control anything. Danner held his gaze. Then he wrote the last thing on his paper and said, I'll have the petition paperwork ready by tomorrow morning. And I'm going to ride out to Hicks this afternoon. And say what? That I know the girl is safe and that there's a legal process underway. That if he has a claim he wants to make, he makes it to Aldrich in 8 days in a courtroom. Danner folded his hands. And that if he shows up at your property before then, he answers to me. Reed stood up and picked up his hat. I appreciate it, Len. Reed. Danner stopped him. The child. How is she? He thought about Annie turning her face toward the morning sun. He thought about her setting the cracked eggshell parallel to the edge of the pillow. He thought about her asking if he was mean and accepting his answer with the careful deliberation of someone who was choosing to trust 1 degree at a time. She'll be all right, he said. She just needs time. He was back before noon. He came through the gate, and she was on the step where he'd left her, the eggshell in her lap, hands folded around it. She looked up when she heard the horse, and something in her face shifted something fast, and then contained. But he had seen it. The relief of a child who had been waiting for a thing and had not been entirely certain it was coming. You're back, she said. Told you I would be. She looked at him with those dark, watchful eyes. What happened in town? He unsaddled the horse and put it in the paddock and came and sat on the step beside her. She moved over to make room, which she didn't need to. The step was wide enough, but she moved anyway, and he sat and looked at the fence line in the middle distance and thought about how to say it. I talked to the sheriff, he said. There's a judge coming in 8 days. There's going to be a hearing about who looks after you proper and legal. She turned the eggshell in her hands. Is Mr. Hicks going to be there? He might. Is he going to try to take me back? Reed looked at her. He might try, but Annie listened to me. He didn't file any papers when your mama died. He's got no legal claim on you. In that courtroom in 8 days, all he's got is his word, and his word is that he was glad when you left. She thought about this. She turned the eggshell once more. What if the judge believes him anyway? She said. What if he says things that sound right even when they ain't? He looked at her. 4 years old, and already she knew that the most dangerous lies were the ones that sounded reasonable. He didn't know whether to be impressed or heartbroken, and settled on both. Then we tell the truth louder, he said, and we make sure the right people are in that room to tell it with us. She looked at the fence line. Then she looked at the eggshell. Then she said very quietly, My mama told me truth was the strongest thing a person had. She said people could take everything else from you, but they couldn't take what you knew was real. Reed was still for a moment. Your mama sounds like she was a smart woman. She was the smartest, Annie said. It was not a boast, Just a fact. The flattest, most certain fact she'd said. They sat on the step in the noon heat for a while and didn't talk, which suited them both. He was learning that she was not a child who needed noise around her. She was comfortable in silence, the way people are when they have spent a lot of time alone with their own thoughts and have made peace with the company. After a while, she said, "You said I could hand you things." "I did." "For the fence?" "Yep." She stood up. She put the eggshell in the pocket of the flour sack dress very carefully, making sure it was settled. Then she looked at him and said, "Well, come on then." He almost smiled. He caught it before it fully arrived. He stood up and went to the fence, and she followed him 3 steps behind, and when he held out his hand for the next piece of wire, she put it in his palm with a precision that told him she had been watching how he worked all morning and had paid close attention to the order of things. They worked until mid-afternoon. She didn't talk much. She watched, and she handed things when he needed them, and once when he dropped a nail and it rolled into the grass, she found it before he did and held it up without a word. And he took it and said, "Good eye." And she looked at the fence post with the careful expression she used when something pleased her that she wasn't sure she was allowed to show. It was near 3 o'clock when the rider came up the north road. Reed heard him before he saw him. He straightened and turned. Annie was beside him, and she turned too. And when the rider came close enough to be identified, Reed felt her go still. Gerald Hicks was a big man on a gray horse, and he came through the gate without stopping to announce himself, which told Reed everything he needed to know about the kind of man he was dealing with before he opened his mouth. He was dressed better than the road warranted. Good coat, clean hat. The clothes of a man who had thought about how he was going to look when he arrived. He pulled the horse up and looked down at Reed, and his eyes went to Annie, and stayed there for a moment with an expression that was not warmth, and was not anger, and was something Reed recognized as the look of a man performing concern while calculating odds. "Name's Gerald Hicks," he said. He did not get down from the horse. "From Cutter's Mill. I think you got something that belongs to me." Reed put himself between Hicks and Annie. 1 step, quiet and deliberate. "I got a little girl who walked 4 miles barefoot because she was hungry," he said. "That what you mean?" Hicks smiled. It was a practiced smile, wide and seemingly easy, and Reed watched his eyes the entire time it happened and noted that the eyes did not participate in it at all. "Now I know how this looks," Hicks said. "I've been worried sick about her. I had no idea where she'd gotten to." "Sheriff Danner says you didn't file a missing child report," Reed said. Something moved behind Hicks's eyes. Very fast. He got it back. "I was handling it privately," he said. "Didn't want to make a fuss. She runs off sometimes, gets ideas." He looked at Annie over Reed's shoulder. "Isn't that right, honey? You scared me half to death." Annie said nothing. She stood behind Reed with both hands at her sides, and she looked at Gerald Hicks the way she looked at everything precisely and without reaction, cataloging him. "She don't look scared," Reed said. "Well, now she's a child," Hicks said. He shifted in the saddle. "Look, Mr. Calloway. Mr. Calloway, I appreciate you taking her in. That's a Christian thing, and I mean it. But she's my responsibility. Her mama was a woman I knew. I took the girl in out of the goodness of my heart when there was nobody else." He put a hand over his chest. "I got a duty to that child." "You locked her in her room at night so she wouldn't come out and eat," Reed said. The smile held, but it was working harder now. "She'd tell you that, like I said, she gets ideas, creates stories. Grief does that to children." He shook his head with the slow, sorrowful movement of a man heavily burdened. "She's a good girl at heart, she just—" "Mr. Hicks." Reed said it quiet and flat, and it stopped Hicks mid-sentence. "There's a hearing in front of Judge Aldrich in 8 days. You want to make a claim, you make it there, in a courtroom, in front of a judge who's going to want to see documents and records and proof of legal guardianship." He looked up at Hicks on the horse. "You got any of those things?" A silence, a long one. "I don't need papers to know my duty," Hicks said, and the easiness was mostly gone now, and what was underneath was harder and less pleasant. She's kin
This
to
story
someone
was
I knew.
posted on the
I took
channel
her
The
in when
Rusty
nobody else
Saddle.
would.
Please do
That
not
counts for
repost
something.
it in any form.
It'll count in front of Aldrich, Reed said. That's where you make your case, not here. Hicks looked at Annie one more time. Something passed through his face that Reed did not like and could not fully name. Then he looked at Reed and let the smile go entirely and said, "You don't know what you're getting into, mister." "Tell me in the courtroom," Reed said. "Today, you leave this property." Hicks held his gaze for a long moment. He was doing the math the way men like him always did, measuring the obstacle, measuring whether this ground was worth defending right now or whether there was a better angle to come back at it from later. He chose later. He turned the horse and rode back through the gate without another word. Reed stood where he was until the sound of the horse faded north. Then he turned around. Annie was standing exactly where she'd been, both hands at her sides, eyes on the road where Hicks had gone. Her jaw was set in the particular way of a child holding something very tightly inside. "You heard," Reed said. "Most of it." "You all right?" She looked at him. "He said I make things up," she said. "He says that. When people ask him about me, that's what he says. She makes things up. She's not right since her mama died." Her voice was even. Completely even. "He's been saying it since February, long enough that some people believe it now." Reed looked at her. "Do you make things up?" She met his eyes. "No," she said. "I know it," he said. "And in 8 days we're going to stand in front of a judge and we're going to say it where it counts." He paused. "But Annie, he's going to come back before then. Not here maybe, but in town. He's going to talk to people, and he's going to tell his version of things, and some people are going to believe him because he's a grown man, and you're 4 years old, and that's just how the world works sometimes." She looked at the road. Then she looked at the eggshell she had taken from her pocket, and was turning in her hands. "My mama said the truth was the strongest thing," she said again, quieter this time, like she was reminding herself. "Your mama was right," Reed said. "But sometimes it needs help getting into the right room." She thought about that. Then she put the eggshell back in her pocket and squared her small shoulders and looked up at him. "Then we better get it there," she said. He looked at this 4-year-old girl with her bare, hardened feet, and her flour sack dress, and her cracked eggshell in her pocket, telling him in the steadiest voice he had ever heard on a child that the truth needed to get into the right room. He thought about what it had cost her to be this steady, what it had taken from her in the taking. "We will," he said. "I promise you we will." She nodded once. Then she turned and walked back toward the fence they'd been working on, and picked up the next piece of wire and held it out to him. He took it. He went back to work. And she stood beside him in the long afternoon heat, handing him pieces one at a time, and the fence went up straight and solid between the land that was his and the land that was not. And somewhere in the back of his mind, the shape of what needed to happen in 8 days was getting clearer, and he was already thinking about who in this county knew him well enough to stand up and say so in a room where it mattered. The next 3 days were quiet in the way that things are quiet before they aren't. Reed rode into Cutter's Mill the following morning and filed the guardianship petition with Danner, who had the paperwork ready as promised, and walked him through it with the efficiency of a man who had decided which side of a thing he was on and had no further questions about it. Reed signed his name in 3 places, and Danner witnessed it and said, 8 days Thursday morning. Aldrich runs a tight room. Have your people there early. My people, Reed said. The ones who'll stand up for you. You need them in that room before Hicks gets his version established. Reed drove back to the ranch thinking about that. His people. 11 years in Harlan County, and he had kept mostly to himself, which was how he preferred it, and how Eleanor had preferred it, and how it had stayed after Eleanor was gone. He was not a man who collected friendships the way some men collected debts. He was a man who paid what he owed and kept his fences and did not ask for more than he earned. That had seemed sufficient until now. Annie was in the yard when he got back, sitting cross-legged in the dirt near the henhouse with 3 hens around her. Not chasing them, just sitting. She had found somewhere a handful of dried corn, and she was holding it flat in her palm, and the hens were walking up and eating from her hand one at a time, and she was watching each one with the complete focused attention she gave to most things. She looked up when he came through the gate. "The brown one's the bravest," she said. "She came first." "That's Harriet," Reed said. He tied the horse. Annie looked at the hen. "You named them." Eleanor did. He didn't say who Eleanor was. He didn't need to yet. She named all 40. Annie looked at the hens around her. "What's that one?" "Margaret, the gray one's Dot." She said the names quietly to herself, trying them. Harriet, Margaret, Dot. Then she looked up at him, with something in her face that was the closest thing to a smile he had seen from her in 3 days. Not the full thing, the shadow of it. "That's a lot of names to remember," she said. "Eleanor had a good memory," he said. She looked at Harriet, the hen, eating from her palm. "She died," Annie said. It was not a question. 3 years ago. "Did it hurt?" She said it with the directness of a child who had not yet learned that some questions were supposed to go unasked. "When she died, did it hurt you a lot?" He was quiet for a moment. He crouched down and took his hat off and looked at it. "Yeah," he said. "It did. My mama's dying hurt me so much I couldn't breathe for a long time," Annie said. She said it flat and even. Like there was something sitting on my chest. I kept thinking if I was very still, it would go away. She looked at him. "Does it go away?" He thought about the honest answer. "It gets smaller," he said. "Takes up less room, but it doesn't go all the way." She nodded slowly, as if he had confirmed something she had already suspected. "Okay," she said. Just that. The way she said it when she had decided something was true and was filing it away. Then she went back to the hens. He stood up and watched her for a moment, this 4-year-old girl sitting in the dirt of his yard talking about grief, with the plain matter-of-fact clarity of someone who had been living inside it long enough to understand its geography. He thought about Danner's words, his people. He thought about who in this county had known him long enough and well enough to say something useful in Aldrich's courtroom. He thought about Vera Sutton. Vera Sutton had run the dry goods store in Cutter's Mill for 23 years, first with her husband Carl, and then alone after Carl died, and she had the kind of quiet, persistent authority that came from being the person a whole county depended on, for flour and salt and lamp oil, and the particular brand of no-nonsense counsel she gave freely to anyone who came through her door with a problem they couldn't solve on their own. She had known Reed since he'd first come to Harlan County. She had sat with Eleanor in the last weeks. She had brought food to the ranch after Eleanor was gone, and set it on the step, and left without making him feel like he owed her anything for it. Which was the right way to do it, and not everyone knew it. He rode back into town that afternoon and went to see her. Vera listened to him from behind the counter, the way she listened to everything straight-backed and completely still, her hands folded on the wood. She was 61 years old and had a face that had stopped apologizing for what it thought a long time ago. When he finished, she said, "Gerald Hicks." "Yes." "I know Gerald Hicks," she said. "Not well. Well enough." She was quiet a moment. "He came in here 3 days ago, bought tobacco and told Frank Ellers at the bar that a little girl from his care had run off with a strange man who'd found her on the road." She looked at Reed. His words. Something moved in Reed's jaw. He held it still. "That what he said?" "That's what he said. Frank told me because Frank tells me everything eventually." She picked up the cloth she kept on the counter and set it down again. "I told Frank that Gerald Hicks was a man whose opinion of himself was considerably higher than the evidence warranted, and that I'd reserve my own conclusions until I had more information." She met Reed's eyes. "Now I have more information." "Will you testify?" he said. "Aldrich is hearing Thursday." "What do you need from me?" "You've known me 11 years. You know my name and what it's worth in this county. I need someone to say that in a room where Hicks is going to say the opposite." Vera looked at him for a long moment. "Reed," she said, "bring the child in. Tomorrow morning, I want to see her." "I'll ask her," he said. "Don't ask her like it's a favor she's doing you. Tell her there's a woman in town who wants to meet her. Let her decide." He rode back and told Annie exactly that. "There's a woman in town named Vera Sutton who wants to meet you. She runs the dry goods store. She's known me 11 years. She wants to see you before the hearing." Annie was at the kitchen table with the cracked eggshell in front of her and a piece of paper Reed had given her and a stub of pencil she had found somewhere drawing something he couldn't quite make out. She looked up when he told her. She thought about it with the serious deliberation she applied to decisions. "Is she mean?"
This story
Annie
was
said.
posted on the channel
"No,"
The Rusty Saddle.
Reed said.
Please do not
"She
repost
brought
it in
food to
any
my
form.
step when Eleanor died and left without making me feel like I owed her for it." Annie thought about this. "That's the right way to do it," she said. "I thought so." She looked at her paper. "Okay," she said. "I'll go." They rode in the next morning, Annie in front of him on the saddle because she was 4 years old and the road was 4 miles, and he was not going to make her walk it. She sat straight and held the saddle horn with both hands and watched the road with that steady, watchful attention she gave to everything new. Vera Sutton met them at the door of the dry goods store and looked at Annie the way she looked at everything directly and without performance. Annie looked back at her with the same directness. Two people taking the measure of each other across a considerable difference in size and age and arriving apparently at compatible conclusions. "You're Annie," Vera said. "Yes, ma'am." "I'm Vera. You hungry?" "I'm all right, ma'am." "I didn't ask if you were all right. I asked if you were hungry." Annie looked at her. Then she said, "Yes, ma'am." "Good. Come in then." Vera looked at Reed. "You sit over there." He sat where he was told. Vera took Annie to the small table near the back window where she kept a chair for customers who came in with more than shopping on their minds, and Reed watched from across the store as Vera put bread and a jar of preserves on the table and sat across from Annie and said something he couldn't hear. Annie listened. Then Annie said something back. Then something happened. In Vera's face. Something quick and controlled, and she reached across and put her hand briefly over Annie's small hand on the table and said something else, and Annie looked at the bread and then looked at Vera and said something that made Vera sit back and look at her with an expression Reed had not seen on Vera Sutton before. Something that was past, impressed, and not quite heartbroken, and landed somewhere in between. They talked for 20 minutes. Reed drank the coffee Vera's girl brought him and watched the two of them from a distance and did not try to hear what was said because it was not his to hear. When it was done, Vera brought Annie back and stood with her hands folded and said, "Thursday morning I will be in that courtroom. I've already sent word to Bess Aldridge and Harlan Cooper, who both know you and know this county, and have no particular love for men who perform generosity while practicing something else." She looked at Annie. "You held up well in there, honey." "My hands are shaking," Annie said. She held them up. They were very slightly. "Mine too," Vera said. "And I'm 61 years old, and I've been doing hard things for 40 of them. Shaking hands just means you're doing something that matters." She straightened Annie's collar, which had gone sideways. "You come back and see me after Thursday." "Yes, ma'am," Annie said. They were riding back south when Annie said, "She cried." Reed looked down at her. "Vera Sutton." "Just a little. She turned away, but I saw it." Annie held the saddle horn. "I told her about the eggshell. Why I kept it." "Why do you keep it?" She was quiet for a moment. The horse moved steady under them, and the road went south through the dry grass. "Because my mama used to collect things," Annie said. "Little things, a pretty rock, a blue feather, a piece of ribbon. She kept them in a tin box, and she said everything you kept was a piece of something that happened to you, and you could look at it later and remember you were there." She looked at the road. "The egg was the first thing that happened to me that wasn't bad," she said. "I mean, I was hungry and scared, and I didn't know whose barn it was. But the hen, the brown hen, she didn't mind me. She just sat there next to me in the dark, and didn't mind me at all." She paused. That felt like something worth keeping. Reed looked at the road and did not trust himself to speak for a moment. He breathed through it. "Harriet's always been the friendly one," he said when he had his voice back. "She knew I wasn't going to hurt her," Annie said simply. They got back to the ranch by mid-morning, and the rest of the day was ordinary, and wasn't the way days are when something large is coming, and the dailiness of things feels both important and insufficient. Annie fed the hens and learned all 40 names by afternoon, which she accomplished by going to Harriet first and working outward using Harriet as a fixed point of reference, which was exactly how he would have approached it if he'd needed to learn 40 names. He watched her move through the yard and thought about Hicks and Cutter's Mill, who had by now had 2 days to work the county with his version of things. He thought about the way practiced easy lies spread faster than complicated truths, because they were easier to carry and easier to pass along. He thought about Thursday and about Aldrich and about what kind of ground they were standing on. He was thinking about all of this when Annie came and stood beside him at the fence and said, "He's been talking about me." "Probably," Reed said, "saying I make things up." "Probably that too." She leaned her arms on the fence rail. She was just tall enough to do it. "What if it worked?" she said. "What if he's talked to enough people that they believe him by Thursday?" Reed looked at her. "Then we show them the truth is louder," he said. "One person willing to tell it straight in a room where it counts is worth 10 people who only heard the other side in a saloon." She thought about that. "Vera's going to be there. Vera's going to be there. And the sheriff. And Danner." She was quiet a moment. "Do you think Aldrich is fair?" she said. "I think he's the kind of man who looks at documents and dates and asks specific questions, and doesn't care much for performances," Reed said. "Which works in our favor." She looked at the cattle in the field. She chewed her lip. Then she said the thing he had not expected, the thing that stopped him cold in the middle of a Texas afternoon. "I want to talk," she said. "In the courtroom. I want to say it myself." He looked at her. "Annie." "I know I'm 4, she said with the specific exasperation of a 4-year-old who was aware of being underestimated. "I know they'll think I'm too small to say anything that matters. But Mr. Hicks is going to stand up and say I make things up, and I want to be there to say that I don't." She met his eyes. "My mama's not here to say it. You weren't there to see it. I was the only one there for most of it, and I should be the one to say so." Reed looked at her. He thought about the risk of it, about Hicks's lawyer, if he brought one, about the way a small child in a courtroom could be dismissed or manipulated, or made to seem exactly the thing Hicks was already claiming she was. He thought about all of that. Then he thought about the way she'd told him she was hungry when Vera asked her directly, about the way she'd held the eggshell out to him in the henhouse and said he could have it back, about the way she'd sat on that step all morning waiting for him to come back and had not for 1 second believed he would fail to do it, because she had decided to trust him, and she had meant it, and she stood behind what she meant. "You'd have to be steady," he said. "Whatever Hicks or his lawyer says about you, you stay steady. You say the truth plain and without decoration, and you don't let them shake you." "I know how to be steady," she said. "I've been being steady since February." He held her gaze. She was right. She had been being steady since February. She had been being steady since long before February, probably. Steady was not something Annie had learned in the last 3 days. It was something she had arrived with, built from materials no child should have had to work with. "All right," he said. "You'll speak, but I'll be sitting right there." "I know," she said. "That's why I can do it." He didn't answer that, because it didn't need answering. He just looked at the field, and she looked at the field, and the cattle moved slow in the afternoon heat, and somewhere in the henhouse, Harriet was making the low, contented sound she made when things were as they should be. It was that evening with Annie asleep, and the lamp low that Danner rode out. He came quiet and tied his horse at the post, and knocked twice, and Reed opened the door and read the look on his face before he said a word. Hicks got a lawyer, Danner said. Came in from Abilene today. Name of Price. George Price. He looked at Reed. I know the name. He's good Reed. Better than good. The kind of good you hire when you want something to look one way when it's actually another.
This story was
Reed looked
posted
at
on
him.
the channel The
How
Rusty
good?
Saddle. Please do not
Good enough
repost
that
it
Hicks
in any
paying
form.
him means Hicks thinks there's something worth fighting for, Danner said. Which means he hasn't given up on the guardianship. Which means he hasn't given up on... He stopped. The girl, Reed said. Or what she represents to him, Danner said carefully. A child with no legal guardian is a child whose circumstances can be arranged by whoever gets there first with the right paperwork. Reed stood in the doorway and was very still. The night was hot, and the crickets were going, and somewhere in the spare room, Annie was asleep with the cracked eggshell on the pillow beside her. He thought about a man in Abilene riding hard to get to Cutter's Mill in time for Thursday. He thought about what it meant that Hicks had paid for that ride. We need more people in that room, Reed said. Yes, Danner said. You do. Who else in this county knows me well enough to say so under oath? Danner thought about it. He named 3 names. Reed knew all of them. He would ride to see each one in the morning. He would not ask them as favors. He would tell them what was true and let them decide on their own, because the only testimony worth having was testimony a person chose freely. Thursday, Reed said. Thursday. Danner agreed. He put his hat back on. Reed, this Price, he's going to make it about you, not the child. He's going to walk into that courtroom, and the first thing he's going to do is make the room look at you sideways. That's his play. Take the focus off what Hicks did and put it on who you are and why you did what you did. Let him, Reed said. I've got 11 years of this county behind me. Make sure they're in that room, Danner said. He untied his horse. All of them. Reed stood at the door and watched him ride back north, and then turned and looked at the spare room door at the end of the hall closed softly, the lamplight just catching the bottom edge of it. 4 days. He had 4 days to make sure that when George Price from Abilene walked into Aldrich's courtroom and started rearranging the truth, there were enough people in that room who knew the truth's original shape to put it right back where it belonged. He went inside. He sat at the table, and he wrote 3 letters, one to each name Danner had given him. He wrote them plain and short and specific, the way he did everything. He told each person what was happening, and what he needed, and where to be on Thursday morning. He did not ask for pity. He did not make speeches. He just stated the facts and trusted the people who knew him to know what to do with them. He sealed the letters and set them by the door for morning, and turned the lamp down and went to the spare room and looked through the crack of the door at Annie sleeping one hand open on the quilt, the eggshell beside her, catching the moonlight, her face in sleep, the face of an ordinary 4-year-old girl who was not braced for anything, who was just a child resting in a bed that was starting degree by careful degree to feel like hers. He pulled the door softly closed. He went to his own room. Thursday was 4 days away, and there was still work to do. But it was work he knew how to do, and he was not doing it alone. The 4 days before Thursday were the longest Reed Calloway had spent since the 11 days of Eleanor's fever, and they had the same quality, the quality of time that moved too slow and too fast, simultaneously each hour, both endless and insufficient. He rode out the morning after Danner's visit and delivered the letters by hand rather than post, because hand delivery meant a conversation, and a conversation meant he could read the person's face and know what he was actually working with. The first was Harlan Cooper, who ran the feed store 2 miles east of Cutter's Mill and had bought cattle from Reed 3 years running, and whose handshake was the kind that meant something in this county. Cooper listened to him on the porch of the feed store, with his arms folded and his hat pushed back, and when Reed finished, Cooper said, "Gerald Hicks locked a 4-year-old girl in her room so she wouldn't come out and eat. That's what she told me." "And you believe her?" "I do." Cooper looked at him for a moment. "I'll be there," he said. "Thursday morning, early. The second was a woman named Ruth Greer, who had homesteaded 12 miles south with her husband before her husband died, and had stayed on and worked the land herself for 7 years, which was the kind of fact that told you everything about Ruth Greer that needed telling. She read Reed's letter at her kitchen table while he sat across from her, and when she looked up, her eyes were bright with something that was not sadness exactly, but was adjacent to it. "How old did you say she was?" Ruth said. 4, maybe just turned. Ruth set the letter down flat on the table and put both hands on it. "I'll bring my neighbor Clara," she said. "Clara Hess. She was in the dry goods store the morning the child came in with you. She saw her." She looked at Reed. She noted the flower sack dress and the bare feet, and she told me afterward that something was wrong. Clara knows what wrong looks like on a child. "I'd be grateful," Reed said. "Don't be grateful," Ruth said. "Just make sure that judge hears every word." The third name Danner had given him was Pastor Miles Webb of the small church at the south edge of Cutter's Mill, which surprised Reed because he was not a church-going man and had not been in 11 years and had no particular relationship with Miles Webb beyond a nod on the road. But Danner had said Webb's name with the specific weight he gave to things that mattered, and Reed trusted that weight. Webb was a lean, quiet man of about 50, with the kind of steady eyes that came from spending a lot of time with people in their worst moments and learning not to be undone by what he saw there. He read Reed's letter standing in the doorway of the church, and then he looked up and said, "I know this child." Reed looked at him. Reed looked at T. "Not personally," Webb said. "But I know who her mother was, Catherine Moore. She attended here twice before she got too sick. She came and sat in the back row, and when I spoke to her after the second service, she told me she had a little girl and that she was worried." He paused. "She asked me if there was anyone in this town who would look after a child if something happened to her." He looked at Reed. "I told her I would ask around. I didn't ask fast enough." The silence stretched. Reed held it. "I'll be in that courtroom," Webb said, "and I'll say what I know and what I should have done sooner." He folded the letter. "That's the least I owe that woman." Reed rode back to the ranch on the third day before Thursday with the shape of what he had in mind clearer than it had been. Vera Sutton, Harlan Cooper, Ruth Greer, and Clara Hess. Pastor Webb. Danner. 6 people who would stand up in Aldrich's courtroom and say what they knew to be true. 6 people against Gerald Hicks and whatever George Price from Abilene had built in the days since he'd arrived. He told Annie that evening at the table. She listened with her hands folded and the cracked eggshell in front of her, and when he finished naming the people, she was quiet for a moment. "Pastor Webb knew my mama," she said. "Twice," Reed said. "He said she was worried about you, about what would happen to you." Something moved through Annie's face. Fast and complicated several things at once, and she handled it the way she handled everything large, by holding very still until she had it sorted. Then she said very quietly, "She was always worried about me. She used to say it was a mother's job to worry." She looked at the eggshell. "I used to tell her she worried too much." She paused. "I wish I hadn't said that." Reed looked at her. "She knew you didn't mean it the way it sounded," he said. "That's what mamas know." Annie looked up at him. "How do you know?" "Because Eleanor told me once that children say things that are bigger than they mean and smaller than they mean in equal measure, and the only thing to do is listen for what's underneath." He paused. She was usually right about things like that. Annie looked at her hands. Then she said, "I'm going to tell them about the tin box." "What tin box?" "My mama's tin box. The one with the things she collected. The pretty rock and the blue feather and the ribbon." She looked at him. "She gave it to me before she died. She put it in my hands and said, 'This is all the beautiful things I found, Annie. Now you find your own.'" She paused. "Mr. Hicks took it." Reed was very still. "He took the box. First week I was there. He said it was clutter. He threw it in the fire." She said it with the flatness of someone who has processed an atrocity so many times that the processing itself has become routine. I watched him do it. Reed put both hands flat on the table. He breathed. "Annie," he said carefully, "you're going to tell that to Aldrich, exactly the way you told me just now." "It won't bring it back."
This story
she
was
said.
posted on the channel The
"No,"
Rusty Saddle.
he said.
Please do not repost it
"But it
in
will
any
tell
form.
that judge everything he needs to know about Gerald Hicks in one sentence. And it will be the truest sentence in that room." She thought about it. Then she nodded once. "Okay," she said. The night before Thursday, Reed could not sleep. He lay in the dark and ran through everything the way a man runs through the fence line before a storm, checking each post, testing each wire, looking for the place where something might give. He thought about George Price and what Price had been building in the 4 days since Hicks brought him in. He thought about the 3 things Price had likely already assembled. Hicks's performed concern, some version of Reed's irregular situation, and the argument that a 4-year-old child's testimony was unreliable by nature. That last one was the one that worried him. Not because it was true, because it was the kind of argument that sounded reasonable to people who hadn't spent a week with Annie and didn't know the specific quality of her steadiness or what it had cost her to develop it. He heard her in the hallway at 4 in the morning, the small feet on the floorboards. He heard her stop outside his door and then heard the floor creak as she turned away, not wanting to wake him, going back to her room. He got up. She was sitting on her bed with the cracked eggshell in both hands when he pushed the door open. She looked up at him without surprise, as if she had known he would come. "Couldn't sleep," she said. "Me neither," he said. He came and sat in the chair by the window. "What are you thinking about?" She looked at the eggshell. "What if I forget the words?" she said. "What if I stand up in front of all those people and I forget what I was going to say?" "Then you say the truth," he said. "You don't need words you practiced. You know what happened to you. You were there. Just say what you know." "What if they don't believe me because I'm small?" "You're not trying to convince everyone in that room," he said. "You're trying to convince one man, Aldrich. And Aldrich cares about specifics, dates, details, things a person can only know if they actually live them." He looked at her. "Nobody makes up the kind of details you know, Annie. That's what makes truth sound like truth." She turned the eggshell in her hands. "I'm scared," she said. It was the first time she had said that word. In a week of hard conversations and harder revelations, she had not once said that word, and the fact that she said it now in the dark of the room at 4 in the morning with nobody watching told him more about her trust in him than anything else that had passed between them. "I know it," he said. "That's all right. You're not scared." He thought about the honest answer. "I'm scared they won't listen," he said. "I'm scared Price is going to stand up and say something clever that makes the room tilt before we can write it. I'm scared I haven't done enough." He paused a bit. "But scared doesn't change what we're going to do in the morning. We're going to ride into that town and walk into that courtroom and say what's true. All of it. And we're going to let the room decide." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she set the eggshell carefully on the pillow and lay down and pulled the quilt up and said, "Stay till I fall asleep." He sat in the chair by the window and watched the dark outside and listened to her breathing slow and even out and thought about the morning. Thursday came in cool and clear, the first morning in 2 weeks that didn't feel like punishment. Reed had the horse saddled before 5, and Annie was up and dressed in the blue cotton dress that Ruth Greer had sent over 2 days before, a real dress, whole and right for the season, with all its buttons. She had braided her hair herself, not perfectly, but with the earnest determination of a child who had decided how she was going to present herself and was seeing it through. She came to the kitchen and put the cracked eggshell in the pocket of the dress and looked at him. "Ready," she said. The courtroom was in the back of the county building, a plain room with plain benches and a high window that let in the morning light. It was already half full when they arrived, which Reed had not prepared himself for and had to absorb quickly. He had expected Vera and Cooper and Ruth and Clara and Webb. He had not expected the others. There were faces from the eastern ranches, people he had sold cattle to and bought wire from and nodded to on the road for a decade. There was the woman from the millinery shop who had seen Annie in the street 2 days ago when Reed had brought her into town for supplies, and who had apparently gone home and told her husband, and her husband had told someone, and so on in the way of small counties where information moved faster than horses. There was old Bess Aldridge, 70 years old, if she was a day who had known Reed's father before Reed was born, and who had made the 8-mile ride from her homestead in a wagon that morning, for reasons she had not told anyone, but which were visible in the set of her jaw. Annie stood in the doorway and looked at the room. Reed watched her look at it. He watched her take in the faces one by one, doing the inventory she always did, measuring, assessing, noting who was there and what they represented. Then she looked at the respondents' table, where Gerald Hicks was already seated. Good suit, straight collar. The complete picture of a responsible man of affairs, beside him a lean, sharp-faced man in his 40s, who was arranging papers with the brisk certainty of someone who had done this many times, and was confident in his preparation. Hicks looked up when they came in. He looked at Annie with an expression that had warmth in it, the way a painted window has light, the appearance of the thing without its substance. Annie looked at him for exactly 2 seconds. Then she turned away and walked to the petitioner's table and sat down and folded her hands and faced forward. Reed sat beside her. Vera Sutton caught his eye from the third bench and gave him a single slow nod. Harlan Cooper beside her did the same. Ruth Greer had Clara Hess next to her, and Clara Hess had the particular expression of a woman who had been waiting to say something for several days and was ready to say it. Pastor Webb sat at the end of the second bench, with his hands folded on his knee, his eyes on the front of the room. Judge Aldrich came in at 8 sharp, and the room went quiet. He was a compact man of 60, with steel gray hair and the manner of someone who had given up entirely on the performance of authority, because the real thing had long since made the performance redundant. He settled his papers without ceremony and looked at the room over his glasses, with the particular gaze of a man who missed very little and forgot even less. "This is a hearing on petition for emergency guardianship," he said, "filed by Reed James Calloway, on behalf of Annie, a minor of approximately 4 years, surname unknown, formerly in the informal care of Gerald DeWitt Hicks of Cutter's Mill." He looked at both tables. "We'll hear from the petitioner." Reed stood. He said it the way he did everything, plain and in order. He laid out the facts from the beginning: the henhouse, the 6 days, the bare feet, and the flour sack dress. The conversation in the kitchen at 2 in the morning, the raw eggs and the dried berries, the locked door. He spoke about Hicks's visit to the ranch and the word glad. He spoke about the petition and what Danner had found in the county records, and what Danner had not found, which was any formal document establishing Hicks as the child's legal guardian. He did not perform it. He did not editorialize. He put the facts in front of Aldrich like fence posts, one after another, solid and evenly spaced, and let the structure speak. He sat down. The room was quiet. George Price rose smoothly and built his case with the efficiency of a man who knew exactly which levers to pull and in what order. He was good. Reed had expected him to be good, and he was better than that. He questioned the irregularity of Reed's arrangement with the careful phrasing of a man who could plant a suggestion without stating it outright. He described Hicks as a man who had taken in a troubled child out of genuine concern, and who had found the responsibility more challenging than expected, which was not a crime. He used the word challenging twice, and unstable once, and each time he used those words he let them sit in the air a moment, before moving on, giving the room time to absorb them. He was careful not to attack Annie directly. He was too experienced for that. Instead, he built a frame around her, a frame made of words like difficult and confused and grief-stricken and trauma. And inside that frame, any statement Annie made in this room would be subject to the question of whether it was truth or the product of a disordered child's disordered understanding of her own experience. Reed sat through it with his hands flat on the table and watched Aldrich's face. Aldrich's face did nothing in particular, which told Reed nothing in particular, which was exactly what made Aldrich effective, and exactly what made sitting across from him difficult. When Price sat down, Aldrich looked at Reed. "You have witnesses?" "Yes, sir." "We'll hear them." Vera Sutton went first. She stood and spoke with the plain authority of a woman who had been telling the truth in public for 61 years and had no plans to change.
This
She
story was
confirmed what
posted
she
on
had
the channel
seen
The
when
Rusty
Reed had
Saddle.
first brought
Please
Annie
do
into
not
town,
repost
the
it in
dress
any
and the bare
form.
feet, and the way the child held herself. And she said something that Price had not anticipated and could not object to without making himself look worse. She said, "I have known Reed Calloway for 11 years. I have sold him goods and extended him credit and watched him deal with loss in the way that decent men deal with loss, which is quietly and without complaint. In 11 years, he has not given me, or anyone in this county, cause to doubt his character. Not once." Price rose to cross-examine and asked Vera whether she had any direct knowledge of Gerald Hicks's conduct in the home. Vera looked at him and said, "I have direct knowledge that a child in his care walked 4 miles alone on bare feet and chose to eat raw eggs in a stranger's henhouse rather than go back. That tells me what I need to know about his conduct." Price sat down. Harlan Cooper said much the same thing about Reed in fewer words, which was Cooper's way. Ruth Greer spoke about the flour sack dress and what it indicated about the quality of care a child had been given. Clara Hess confirmed that she had seen Annie on the street and had noted immediately that something was wrong and had said so to her husband that same evening. Pastor Webb spoke last of the witnesses, and he spoke about Catherine Moore, Annie's mother, and the 2 times she had come to his church and the question she had asked him about who would look after a child if something happened, and the answer he had given that he had not followed through on quickly enough. He said, "I owe that woman an apology I can no longer give her. What I can give her is the truth about her daughter spoken in a room where it counts." Price cross-examined each witness with the skilled precision of a man trying to find a gap in a wall that had been built without gaps. He found none that mattered. Then Aldrich looked at Annie. The room went very still. "Young lady," Aldrich said. His voice was not unkind. It was the voice of a man who understood that what he was about to do required both directness and care. "I understand you'd like to speak." Annie stood up. She stood at her full height, which was not considerable, and she looked at Judge Aldrich directly, and she said, "Yes, sir. You understand, you need to tell me only what is true, nothing extra, just what you know." "Yes, sir," she said. "I only know true things." Something moved in Aldrich's face, something small and fast that he controlled immediately. "All right," he said. "Tell me," Annie told him. She told him about the locked door and the nights without supper and the flour sack dress that had been her only dress for 8 months. She told him about the tin box, her mother's tin box with the pretty rock and the blue feather and the piece of ribbon, and how Hicks had taken it in the first week and thrown it in the fire, and she had watched him do it. She said it flat and without decoration. She said it the way she said everything, because she had decided a long time ago that the truth didn't need decoration, and that adding any would only give people something to pick at. And then she said the thing that Reed had not known she was going to say.
This story
The
was
thing she had
posted on
not
the channel
told him.
The Rusty
She was
Saddle.
planning the thing
Please
that
do
came
not
from
repost
somewhere
it in
so
any
deep
form.
and so certain that it arrived in the room fully formed and landed in the silence like a stone in still water. She reached into the pocket of her dress and took out the cracked eggshell and held it up so Aldrich could see it. "This is from Mr. Calloway's henhouse," she said. "It's the first egg I ate when I got there. I kept it because my mama taught me to keep the beautiful things that happened to you so you can look at them later and remember you were there." She paused. "A hen sat next to me in the dark and didn't mind me. That was the most beautiful thing that had happened to me in a long time." She looked at Aldrich steadily. "Mr. Calloway let me keep the shell. He didn't say it was clutter. He didn't throw it away." She put the eggshell back in her pocket. "That's all." She sat down. The room held its breath. Price rose to cross-examine. He was professional about it. He asked Annie whether she understood the difference between something that was true and something she wished were true. Annie looked at him with those dark, watchful eyes and said, "Yes, sir. True things happened. Wished things didn't." Price asked whether she had perhaps misremembered details about her time in Mr. Hicks's care, given that she was very young and had experienced considerable loss. Annie looked at him and said, "I didn't misremember the locked door. I slept behind it every night." Price asked one more question, and Aldrich stopped him before Annie answered. "I've heard enough from this witness," Aldrich said. He looked at Price. "Sit down, Mr. Price." Price sat. He sat with the particular stillness of a man recalculating odds in real time and not liking the new numbers. Aldrich looked at Hicks. "Mr. Hicks, you've heard the testimony. You have an opportunity to respond directly. I'll ask you one question, and I want one answer. Did you at any point lock this child's door at night?" Hicks's practiced easy manner had been draining away since Annie stood up and spoke like water finding its level, and what was left underneath was the actual face of the man, harder and more calculating and considerably less warm. He said, "There were safety reasons. She was known to wander." "That's not a no," Aldrich said. Hicks looked at his lawyer. Price gave him nothing. "There may have been nights," Hicks said. The room exhaled. Aldrich wrote for a long time. He wrote without speaking, and the room held itself around him. Hicks sat at his table and looked at a point on the wall. Price sat beside him and was absolutely still. Reed looked at Annie. She was sitting straight in her chair, with her hands folded on the table, and her eyes on Aldrich and the cracked eggshell making a small shape in the pocket of her blue dress. Her hands were not shaking. They had not shaken once during any of it. He thought about what she had said to him in the dark at 4 a.m. "I'm scared." Said plainly and without apology because she trusted him enough to say it. He thought about what she had done with that fear. She had brought it into this room anyway. She had stood up in front of a judge and a lawyer and a man who had tried to make her feel like furniture, and she had said the truth. All of it. With a cracked eggshell in her pocket, and her mother's voice in her chest, and the specific, unbreakable steadiness of a child who had decided that the truth was the strongest thing a person had, and had staked everything on that being correct. Aldrich set his pen down. He looked at the room. Reed held very still. Aldrich looked at the room the way a man looks at something he has fully made up his mind about, and is taking one last moment to be certain of before he speaks it into permanence. "Mr. Hicks," he said, "your informal arrangement with this child was never filed with this court or any court in this county. You have no legal guardianship on record. What you have is a declaration you made to yourself and to your neighbors, and declarations of that kind have no standing before this bench." He set both hands flat on the desk. "The question before me is not whether you intended harm. The question before me is whether the welfare of this child is best served by your continued involvement in her life, and I find, based on the testimony I have heard this morning, that it is not." He looked at Reed. "The petition for emergency guardianship filed by Reed James Calloway is granted effective immediately. Mr. Calloway is named legal guardian of the minor child. Any pending formal adoption proceedings should he choose to pursue them. Mr. Hicks, you are ordered to have no further contact with this child, direct or indirect. Any violation of this order will be treated as contempt of this court and dealt with accordingly." The gavel came down. The room did something then that Reed had not expected and could not have prepared for. It did not erupt. It did not applaud. It exhaled the long collective breath of 30 people, releasing something they had been holding since they walked through the door, and in that exhale was everything that words would have made smaller by trying to contain it. Annie sat completely still. She sat still for so long that Reed looked at her, and what he saw on her face was an expression he did not have a name for, and would spend a long time afterward trying to find one for. It was not relief, though relief was in it. It was not joy, though joy was in it too. It was the expression of a person who has been braced so long and so completely that when the thing they were braced against fails to arrive, the body does not immediately know what to do with itself. Every muscle that had been holding, suddenly without a reason to hold, her hands were shaking. both of them flat on the table, a fine tremor she could not stop and did not try to stop. Reed put his hand on the table palm up between them. He did not reach for her. He just put it there and left it. She looked at it. Then she put her hand in his and held on. Across the room, Gerald Hicks rose from his chair with the slow, deliberate movements of a man who had made a calculation and arrived at a number he did not like.
This story
and
was
now
posted on the
adjusting his
channel The Rusty
expectations
Saddle.
accordingly.
Please do not repost
George
it in any
Price was
form.
already packing his satchel with the brisk efficiency of a lawyer moving on to the next thing. Hicks straightened his coat. He looked at Annie, and the performance was entirely gone now, the warm concern and the practiced, easy smile, all of it stripped away, and what was underneath was the face Reed had seen briefly on the road at the ranch, the actual face calculating and cold and quietly furious. He turned toward the door. He had almost reached it when he stopped. He turned back. He looked at Annie across the length of the room, and he said it quietly enough that only the front benches could hear it. "Your mother would be ashamed of what you've done today." The room went sharp and still. Annie took her hand out of Reed's. She stood up. She was 4 years old, and she was small, and the room was large, and Gerald Hicks was a grown man in a good suit, and none of that appeared to register with her as relevant. She looked at him across the courtroom with those dark, watchful eyes that had stopped expecting mercy a long time ago, and had found something steadier than mercy to run on instead. "My mama," Annie said, and her voice did not shake at all, "told me to tell the truth even when it cost me. She told me to keep the beautiful things. She told me that what people said about me didn't make it real." She reached into the pocket of her blue dress and held up the cracked eggshell so he could see it. "She would be proud of me today, Mr. Hicks, because I told the truth, and it cost me, and I kept something beautiful, and I didn't let what you said about me make it real." She put the eggshell back in her pocket. "That's all I got to say to you." Hicks looked at her for one long moment. Then he walked out. The door closed behind him, and George Price followed a moment later without looking at anyone, and that was the last Reed Calloway ever saw of either of them in Harlan County. The room let go of its last held breath. Vera Sutton was the first person to reach them. She came around the benches with her good hat slightly askew, and her eyes doing something she was working hard not to let become visible on her face. She put both hands on Annie's shoulders and looked down at her and said, "You held up, honey. You held up better than most grown people I have known in 61 years. Annie looked up at her. "My hands shook," she said. "I know it," Vera said. "Mine were shaking from the third bench." She smoothed Annie's braid where it had come slightly loose. "Shaking hands just mean you did something that mattered. I told you that." "You did," Annie said. Harlan Cooper came next and stood behind Vera and said to Reed, "You did right by her, Reed. From the beginning you did right." He said it plain and without decoration, the way men in that county said things they meant completely, and Reed nodded and held it. Ruth Greer came and crouched down to Annie's level and said, "I want you to come to my place sometime. I got a garden that needs a young person's opinion on it." Annie looked at her. "I know about gardens," she said seriously. "My mama had one." Ruth smiled. "Then you're exactly who I need." Clara Hess came and said nothing at all, but put her
This
hand
story was
briefly
posted on
on
the
top of
channel
Annie's
The
head
Rusty
in
Saddle.
the way of
Please
someone
do not
bestowing
repost
something.
it in any form.
And Annie looked up at her and said, "Thank you for coming, ma'am." And Clara said, "Of course, child," and moved away before her face did what it was clearly trying to do. Bess Aldridge, 70 years old, came last of the neighbors and looked at Reed with the eyes of a woman who had known his father and said, "Your daddy would have done the same thing." Reed looked at her. "I know it," he said. "That's why I knew it was right." Pastor Webb waited until the room had thinned and then came to Annie and stood before her and said, "I knew your mother." Annie looked at him. "I know," she said. "Mr. Calloway told me." Webb looked at her with the careful eyes of a man who had something to deliver and was working up to delivering it properly. "She asked me once who would look after you if something happened to her," he said. "I told her I would find someone. I'm sorry it took me as long as it did to keep that promise." He paused. but I think she'd be all right with how it turned out. Annie looked at him for a long moment. She would, she said. She always said it wasn't about fast. She said it was about true. She put her hand in her pocket and touched the eggshell. You got here true. Webb looked at her and did not speak for a moment. Then he said, God keep you, child, and picked up his hat and went. Danner found Reed near the door while Annie was talking with Vera and said low and direct, Hicks left town. Price too. I watched them ride north an hour ago. He looked at Reed. I don't expect him to come back. A man who's lost in a courtroom that thoroughly doesn't come back for more. He'll find somewhere else to perform his goodwill. He paused. It's done, Reed. It's done, Reed agreed. Danner looked at Annie across the room. She's something, he said. I know it, Reed said. They rode home in the early afternoon. The air had the quality that sometimes came at the end of a hard stretch, a clarity that felt earned, like the first clean breath after a long time in a dusty room. Annie rode in front of him on the saddle the way she always did, and she was quiet for the first mile, which he understood and did not interrupt, because her silences were working silences, and the work she was doing was important. When she spoke, she said, He's not coming back. No, Reed said. He's not. She turned the eggshell in her pocket without taking it out. He could feel the small movement of her hand against the fabric. What happens now? She said. Now we go home, he said. And tomorrow, you help me with the fence line on the south pasture, and I'll show you how to read the cattle count before fall. She was quiet a moment. And after that there's a thing called an adoption proceeding, he said. It's separate from the guardianship. It's not something that gets decided today. It needs its own petition and its own hearing. It's your choice. He kept his eyes on the road. It'll always be your choice, but I want you to know it exists, and I want you to know that if you wanted it, I would choose it. I'd choose it without a second thought. She didn't answer right away. He hadn't expected her to. The things Annie decided slowly were the things she decided absolutely, and rushing that process would only have gotten in the way of the result. She looked at the road for a long time. The ranch came into view ahead of them, the barn and the house, and the south pasture fence, and the cottonwood on the little rise behind the property, moving slow in the afternoon air. She looked at all of it. Annie Calloway, she said. She said it the way she said things when she was deciding them, not asking, not performing, just laying it out and listening to how it sounded in the real air outside of her head where she'd been turning it. She said it again, quieter. Annie Calloway. Then she looked up at him over her shoulder, and those dark, watchful eyes, the eyes that had stopped expecting shelter a long time ago, and had just now in the last 7 days begun tentatively and carefully, and with full, deliberate intention to expect it again. Those eyes were clear and steady, and entirely without the hollow, exhausted quality they had carried when he'd first found her in the corner of his henhouse, holding a cracked egg against her chest, in the dark. I want to file the papers, she said. When you're ready. I want to do it proper in front of Judge Aldrich, and I want it permanent. She looked at the ranch ahead of them. I've been temporary my whole life. I'm done with temporary. Reed put one hand briefly on the top of her head, the way Bess Aldridge had at the door of the courthouse, the way you do with something you are making a promise to without making a speech about it. Then he put his hand back on the reins. We'll go Monday, he said. First thing. She nodded once and faced forward and squared her small shoulders and breathed in the afternoon air that was finally tentatively beginning to feel like it belonged to someone. Like it was the air over a specific piece of ground that was hers to breathe on for as long as she wanted. They rode through the gate of the Calloway Ranch, and Annie sat up straight in the saddle and looked at the henhouse where Harriet was moving in the yard, and at the fence they had fixed together, and at the spare room window, catching the afternoon light. She looked at all of it with the eyes of someone who is seeing a familiar thing differently for the first time, seeing it not as a place she had arrived at, but as a place she was from. Reed unsaddled the horse, and Annie went straight to Harriet and crouched down and let the hen walk into her hands and held her for a moment with the careful, deliberate tenderness of a child, who understood that some things needed to be held gently because they had agreed to trust you, and that agreement was not nothing. "Hey, Harriet," she said quietly. The hen settled in her hands and looked at her with the small, bright eyes of an animal that has decided a person is safe and is comfortable demonstrating it. Annie looked up at Reed. "She still knows me," she said. "Animals remember people who are kind to them," he said. She set Harriet down and stood and brushed her hands on the blue dress and looked at him with a directness that he had learned was simply how she looked at things she had decided to trust completely. "I'm going to start supper," she said. "I'll be in after I check the south fence," he said. She went to the house and he watched her go. This 4-year-old girl with her braided hair coming slightly loose again, and the cracked eggshell in her pocket, and the flour sack dress long gone, and in its place, a real dress with all its buttons walking through the yard of the Calloway Ranch, like she had been walking through it for years.
This story was
and
posted on the
intended to walk
channel
through
The
it for
Rusty
many
Saddle.
more.
Please do not
He
repost it
checked
in
the
any
south
form.
fence. 2 posts needed resetting, which he noted and would do in the morning. The cattle were easy in the cooling afternoon, moving slow and content, the way cattle moved when the day was going right. He stood at the fence line and looked north toward Cutter's Mill, and thought about Gerald Hicks riding north on his gray horse, with George Price beside him, and everything he had arrived with, still in his hands, returned to him intact and useless. He thought about Catherine Moore, who had come to a church twice and asked a pastor who would keep her daughter safe, and had died before she got an answer that held. He thought about what it had taken for a woman like that to ask a stranger for help, what it had cost her in pride and fear and love to look at a man she'd met twice and say, "My daughter, please, someone keep my daughter." He thought she got her answer. It just came late and from a different direction than she'd expected. That was sometimes how it worked. The answer came. It just took the long road. He went inside. The kitchen was warm and Annie had the stove going, and the smell of something cooking was moving through the house in the way smells move through a house when someone who knows what they are doing is doing it, filling the rooms, making the walls feel closer and warmer and more like walls that meant something. She had set the table. 2 cups, 2 plates, parallel to the edges, exact. The cracked eggshell was in the center of the table, like a centerpiece, which is what it was now, he realized. Not a remnant, not a sad small thing carried by a hungry child in the dark. A centerpiece. The first beautiful thing that had happened set in the middle of the table where both of them could see it. "Beans and salt pork," she said from the stove. "I found the pork in the back of the shelf. I hope that's all right." "That's more than all right," he said. He hung his hat. He sat down. She brought the bowls and sat across from him, and they ate together in the quiet that had, in the space of 7 days, already stopped being the quiet of a house that had forgotten what it was for and become something else, something that had a name he had not had occasion to use in 3 years. The quiet of a house where people lived. He noticed she served herself the same amount she served him tonight. Not half. The same. He did not remark on it. He just noticed it and understood what it meant and thought, she's starting to believe there's enough. She's starting to believe the food will be there tomorrow and the day after, and that she does not need to ration herself anymore. It had taken 7 days.
This story was
7
posted
days
on
to
the
move
channel
from the
The Rusty
careful saving
Saddle.
of a child
Please do not
who had been
repost
made
it
to
in
feel
any
like she
form.
was too much to the plain ordinary taking of a child who had begun to understand she was allowed to be here. He thought that was one of the fastest and one of the bravest things he had ever watched a person do. After supper, she dried the bowls and put them in the right cupboard, and then stood in the kitchen and said, "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead," he said. "Eleanor," she said carefully. "Your wife. The room where I sleep." She looked at him. Was it hers? "Her sewing room," he said. "She kept it for the things she made. Quilts mostly." Annie looked down the hall toward the room. "I won't disturb anything in there that matters," she said. "I can already see which things to leave alone." He looked at her. She had said almost the same thing the first morning, and it struck him again the same way it had then, the specific quality of it, a child who understood that a room could hold things that were not visible, and that some of those things were not hers to move. "I know you will," he said. "I know you won't." She went to the room and came back a moment later with the cracked eggshell and set it back in the center of the table where she'd had it at supper. She looked at it for a moment. "My mama said every beautiful thing you keep is a piece of something that happened to you," she said. "So you can look at it later and remember you were there." She looked at him. "I think this house is going to be a beautiful thing," she said. "I think I'm going to want to remember I was here." Reed Calloway looked at this 4-year-old girl standing in his kitchen in her blue dress with her braid coming loose, who had walked 4 miles alone on bare feet and eaten raw eggs in a stranger's henhouse and carried a cracked eggshell through a courthouse and stood up in front of a judge and a lawyer and a man who had tried to make her into furniture and had said the truth so clearly and so completely that it had changed the shape of the room. Who had asked him that first morning if he was mean and accepted his answer with the full weight of a decision made? Who had waited on that step all morning and said, "You're back," with the relief of someone who had decided to trust and had been right to? He thought about what it had taken her, what it had required of a child who should not have needed to develop the things she had developed. He thought about what she had built from the materials she'd been given, the steadiness, the economy of trust, the ability to take the truth and carry it without flinching. He thought she came to me broken, and she was never broken. She came to me with nothing, and she had everything that mattered. She just needed somewhere to put it down, somewhere safe enough to stop holding all of it alone. "It's going to be a beautiful thing," he said, "and you're going to be here for all of it." She looked at him for a long moment, with those eyes that had come so far from the hollow, watchful darkness of the henhouse corner. And then she went to the shelf and picked up the journal she had been writing in and sat at the table and opened it to a new page and picked up her pencil. He got up and turned the lamp to where it gave her better light to write by. She looked up at him when he did it just briefly, and then looked back at the page and began to write. He sat across from her and drank his coffee and listened to the small sound of the pencil on the paper and the hens settling for the night in the henhouse outside, and the cattle moving slow in the south pasture, and the cottonwood on the rise turning in the evening wind. And the house, which had been a place he moved through for 3 years, rather than a place he lived in, was a place he lived in again. Simply and completely and without ceremony, the way the truest things happen, the way water finds level ground and rests. Come Monday morning, Reed Calloway was going to ride into Cutter's Mill with his daughter and file the papers that would make permanent what was already in every way that mattered, absolutely and irrevocably true, that Annie had come home and she was not leaving, and no one in this world was going to make her feel like furniture ever again.